Freethinkers Radio. Again, this is part 3 of Coping with Death.
Last part.
Enough of this.
Yo, man, look, it's hard right here.
But we had to do this part because we do have Dr. D. Gulledge in with us tonight.
Absolutely.
To talk about the grief part of the process, the grieving process.
This is the part where I'm going to cry.
You're not going to cry, Beth. I'm not gonna let you cry.
Beth might cry.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, probably.
Beth
now that I think about it.
Won't even lie about that. We're like,
yes, pretty much.
It's all right though. This is a good cry. This is
crying is good. Crying is good.
A coping cry.
Good.
Yeah.
Exactly. Crying is good. People always think of crying as bad. I just embrace it.
Because you just cry about
it. You just cry a lot.
Man, if you know anyone who has dealt with or is dealing with these situations and wants to send some questions to our grief counselor who's joining us today, as much said, absolutely an honor. First of all, know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make sure to share this with anyone you know who may have questions about getting into the grief counseling thing. I have some questions myself. And
yeah, I do too.
We're gonna make this happen. All right, y'all ready?
Let's go.
Go.
Show 73.
Why I press this play button nice?
It's not.
You ain't gonna have us out here. We don't want to cry until we start talking. We're not gonna start out with like.
We got actually this playlist. It's kind of up. It's a good playlist.
Turn that thing on. Oh, the road. So weary.
It's not that. We're not gonna do like that.
Yep. There we go.
For those that need to know, this is Hola by Holland.
I love her. I just love her.
Hello in all kind of languages. Hola, bonjour, all that.
That's it.
Yep, we're back. This is part 3 of Coping with Death. We in our first session we talked to a grieving mother who went through some grieving and a person who deals with policies and final expenses. Last week we talked with York Glover from Primerica about different life insurance and policies. Things we definitely need to know. Final expenses are very important.
That's it.
Nah, but the thing is, after all that, after the money's been spent, after you've paid paid everybody needs to be paid, you still have to live.
Yeah.
Right. And so we are here today with grief counselor,
Dr. D. Gulledge.
Dr. D. Gulledge. First of all, thank you. It's an honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. We'll be back. Feel free to think freely.
And the first song of the night is called When We Pray by Torrin Wells.
Hey, she been doing all right with these playlists, man.
I try my best,
Even though I got turned down a little bit for Facebook. Kick us off the whole website, internet.
They gonna get rid of
You're fired.
Our whole account.
They're out there taking the knee and playing the music. You're fired. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We're not talking about that today.
That's
not what we're gonna talk about. No.
Okay.
Probably not.
That's next week.
Hopefully not.
Okay.
That's next week, right?
Next week?
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know.
All right.
We'll talk about that later then.
Let's see.
I don't know. Not right this second. Not right this second, because we have to be able to take it. That's a tough one. That's one of the hard things about doing this kind of programming and really needing to make making sure you have the right impact. Because if you take on that conversation, it has to end correctly.
Mm.
Right. I've seen a lot of those conversations just not end correctly. Yeah. I don't want to get deep into it, but a lot of those conversations just have not ended correctly because they started with misunderstanding, and so bring it to a place of understanding, then move forward.
Yep.
That's not what I've seen in the conversations having to do with this, and because from the Alabama podium there was a misunderstanding given. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We'll say this. It's not like it's an unknown misunderstanding. The biggest part of the whole situation was that everyone said that they agreed with the reason that he was protesting, but did not agree with the methods. And we all, even on this show, we said we didn't really agree with the methods.
Yeah.
So now, let's start there. You know, they're not protesting a song.
Well, we'll get into that later.
You know, and then, you know, but the conversations need to start more like that. But today, we're not talking about none of that. Shouts out to the great country of the United States and all of its leaders. We are here today to discuss the longest and probably the most important part of dealing with death and death of loved ones. For people who don't know, we started this series based on what was going on in Hurricane Harvey at the time, and Hurricane Irma came right behind it. If you have, first of all, just a little pin in that. If you have access to your congressman, to your person like that, make sure that Puerto Rico is treated like the United States.
Yeah,
treated like it's a part of the United States. There are a lot of people coping with death in Puerto Rico currently. While there are other things being, you know, debated about in governments, but those people are important. They're Americans.
Yeah.
Let's just keep that in mind. These are Americans being, you know, that we don't need to neglect.
Yep.
So, hello. Okay. So, first of all, dealing with the death of loved ones. We talked a lot about the final expenses and about the emotions that come from lack. Right. But just the emotions that come from losing in my case, I lost a child, very young. So it was the feelings of, you know, people say that women are more emotional than men, but I think we're both equally emotional. We just express them differently. But what would happen is my wife was definitely very outward with her emotions, absolutely, and with, you know, obviously. But the hard part about it was to get her to go to grief counseling because she felt like she would have to revisit it. It was almost like a rape victim. You don't want to revisit it, so you don't want to talk to anybody about it. You just want to just skate through it, find me some painkillers, find me something to, you know, get through it. How was, first of all, what have you seen? What have been effective ways to get a person to even accept grief counseling, you know, to go back there and look at it?
Well, very often, if an individual can talk with someone who has experienced a similar loss, that sometimes can open up some doors. I know sometimes when I'm speaking with another person who has a loss and they think no one can understand, and if they hear me say, I know what it feels like to lose a child, then that changes the outlook, that changes the disposition, changes the whole environment of the process. Because all of a sudden, the person who has a hurting heart suddenly realizes, oh, I'm not by myself.
Yeah.
Someone else has walked this path.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that was part of her when she said what was the problem with her wanting to go was she did kind of have that emotion because I don't have the crying thing, right? So I don't. That's not my release. You know, I might go beat up a tree, I might go punch a lot of stuff, but I'm not gonna cry because it just doesn't work for me. Now that's just a for me thing. And I guess in that situation, that kind of did leave her a bit alienated. You know?
Yes, well, every person is different. When we were created uniquely different. And so why do we think that we're going to express feelings in the same way or have the same feelings or emotions just as we are uniquely different? And so our response will be different. Now, there are commonalities, and there likely will be some common thoughts or feelings or expressions. But to say it's cookie cutter, grief is not cookie cutter.
Yeah. Those are good points, because I think that in the moment we think that the way that we feel is the right way, especially because you're dealing with so many different emotions when you lose someone. And so it's easy to look at the person that you're the closest with. A lot of times I feel like it is our spouse, and say, like, how come you're not showing that you're as emotional as I am? Like, this is really awful. How come you're not expressing that? Or even to say, well, you don't understand. I am grieving more than you.
Right.
You know, I think that is something that we say a lot. Like, I'm grieving more than you. And it's obvious in the way that I'm doing that.
Yes. And, excuse me, my take on that is each person must own their own grief. And no comparison, because just as we each are individual in our own right, so then we own the feelings, we own the emotion, we own that relationship we have with the person that's no longer with us. That then becomes our personal experience.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with one of the ladies at our church. She lost her child when it was like 7 months old. And I think that was close to almost 15, 16 years ago when she lost a child when I was 7 months old. And she said just about 4 or 5 years ago, that was the first time she actually got up the confidence to say, I need to go see the grave. Like, I need to go basically own this grief. Like, I've been putting it off. I'm just not going to think about it. I'm not going to drive down this certain road because the grave's over there. I'm not going to go this certain place because that's going to make me think of this. I'm not going to put myself around these type of people because it'll make me think of this, think of my child.
Right.
And she finally just got to the point where she said she sat in the car in the graveyard and was just like, I got to do this now. I got to deal with this. I've been putting it off long enough. I got to deal with it for me to move on. And now she's actually somebody who's trying to help parents cope with losing a child or losing a loved one. But she had to deal with her own pains before she could actually help somebody else deal with their pains. Doctor, I heard you say you lost your daughter. Matter of fact, we was talking before that she was 17 when you lost her. How did you deal with that grief? And also, was there anyone you talked to help you carry that?
Interesting that you should ask that. Because my feeling was no one else understands.
Yeah.
And this was a number of years ago that our daughter Melanie died. And I felt like at that time there was no one to listen and no one to understand. So for 2 years, I went through the wearing the mask of, oh, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. I'm just fine. Thank you. All is going well. And 2 years into it, I had a telephone call one day from one of her doctors, and he said, just thinking about you guys, wanted to check in on you. And I said, oh, we're just fine. Thank you so much. We are fine. I really appreciate you calling. And at the end of the conversation, I walked out of the room in my house, and it was as if an entire bucket full of ice water was dumped on me. And for the first time, I faced reality.
Wow.
That I am not fine. My daughter died. I need some help. So I retraced my steps, called that doctor back on the phone, and I said, I lied. I'm not fine. So it became necessary to not just admit, but almost confess the fact that I had been hiding behind all of this and all of the hurt and the pain and shoving it aside.
Yeah, it's almost like for 2 years you have been putting numbing cream on. Like,
Yes.
I don't want to I don't even want to talk to that. I want to talk about that. I'm good. Let's don't bring that up. And you just got to think, it took you 2 years. Some people, like I said, the lady from my church took 10 years. All that build up over time, the wear and tear it does on the mind and the heart, the conversations you've had with people, and even dealing with your own build up, how do you help them walk through that? Look, there's some scar tissue that we need to work on right now.
Indeed, the scar tissue is there. Very often, a person just needs permission. They need to know it's okay. It's okay to release the tears. So many people see tears as a sign of weakness, whereas in actuality, tears can be very strong, and they can be a sign of courage, because it requires a lot of effort, a lot of courage to be willing to say,
Right.
let the tears go. And tears can be healing, because we know that they clean out some of the toxic materials in our bodies.
Wow.
No.
Never knew that.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
kind of.
I got old constipated eyes.
Yeah, and I'm with you with that, Dave, because like when my father passed, it was first thing he told me, he was in pain, out of all pain. I could see it, and I was crying. He just stopped, shut down out of pain, and said, "What I want you to do, I want you to walk out this room, wipe your eyes, and come back in and talk to me."
We'll be back. We'll be back. We're gonna continue. Make sure you send your questions and your comments in for the grief counselor, Dr. D, here today.
Yeah.
All right.
This first song right here, I'm gonna go. This is my joint right here, though.
Go ahead, announce it then. We'll announce it.
This is Lecrae with Broke.
All right, there it is.
There it is.
There it is. We'll be back. Freethinkers Radio.
Oh man,
that was good.
Yeah. Facebook, send your questions and
YouTube Live as well if you have any comments.
You know,
right, we on all that, right? Periscope.
You know, what I realize is it's almost hard to talk about grief. Like it's like, man, I gotta talk about grief. I gotta carry this weight of even talking about grief. But you know, the thing is, every person's gonna face grief sooner or later. It's kind of like you need to learn how to deal with it now,
right?
Versus wait until it come and then, you know, it's like whole world shuts down because I ain't never felt this kind of pain before.
Depends on what, you know, your community, how you brought up too. You just don't know. You're shown how to deal with it, and a lot of people don't deal with it.
That's right.
Exactly. And in this disposable world we live in, disposable and fast.
Yep.
Right.
So true. All right, here we go.
All right, and we back. Being broke made me rich. But we're back. Freethinkers Radio. Shouts out to the new Lecrae album.
Yes.
Really impressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, something really big brought up during the break, Jay. Well, you were right. You know, we're not really trained on how to deal with grief in that way. We're kind of trained how to sidestep it. You know what I'm saying? Or you sidestep it, suck it up, but you're never in a position to take grief as a sad situation and be sad. I wasn't taught that.
Right.
You know, I was taught, you see it, you know what I'm saying, whatever it is that's grieving you, that's called the enemy. You know what you do with the enemy?
Yep.
Find something that kills the enemy.
Right.
Wow.
So I don't, you know, so I can see how, like you say, that's how I'm out here. Yeah, I couldn't cry if I wanted to, bro. I could, like, for real. I don't know. I just did it. I don't know if that part of your body shuts down or those pores just stop working, but that ain't just gonna happen.
Right.
But I think it's almost like with anything else. If you don't lift any weights at all, and all of a sudden 100-pound weight comes in your direction, you have to catch it. Yeah. You're gonna hurt something because you're not prepared to deal with even 100 pounds. Not as if 100 pounds is 1,000,000 pounds. I mean, it's not a ton, but it's weight.
Right.
If you've never been taught how to handle weight, you're not going to handle weight correctly when it comes your way.
So I know that we're talking about death, and everything that we've talked about is actually physical death. So like the actual loss of loved ones. But I noticed on your card that you say loss and grief. And so that can come in more than death. Do you handle that? What does that look like for you at your practice? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because actually the net should be cast very wide for loss, because loss can also come, loss of physical beauty, loss of a limb. There could be loss of body parts.
And we're actually dealing with death, really, in a certain extent, because it's the death of something that we had and no longer have.
Something that we were comfortable with or familiar with. Even for some people, it seems so mundane, but when you go to the doctor and he says, you've got to cut out that caffeinated coffee.
Hey, Bev just took her coffee off the table like, come on, man.
Excuse me while I sip my Starbucks over here.
There you go. And do you see how that can really be impacting and influencing on a life?
No, it is true, because this is decaf actually, because I do have to cut back, and that is hard though. That is it is, so for me, I got pregnant as a teenager and placed my daughter for adoption, and so it was years and years and years of grieving silently because it was a secret. Nobody knew. And so, and I just actually publicly announced it this past year. And so, but that grief she is still alive and well and beautiful and healthy. She's 15, but that was it was almost like death to me.
Yes.
And so I was dealing with a lot of death grief coping, because, and even though she's not actually physically dead. And so it's
the relationship.
Correct.
And a lot of the times it is it revolves around relationship.
And I was going to say, even friendships. Have you guys thought about that? The death of a friendship, that is real. That is very real. That is coping with. I think a lot of times we just miss, and we think, well, the physical dying and being totally gone off the earth, and it's so much. Our being is so much more than that. And
yes. Wow. And even, have you given consideration to relocating, leaving everything you were familiar with? And think about that. Going to a new environment and making a way. And and even in the work world, even if you leave behind a workplace that was good.
Yep.
And perfect, and you go into a new one, there's still relationships
absolutely
related to that.
That's true.
Wow. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. I never thought of that as grief, but yeah, you're right. Relocation, I could see. I've seen people have relocation grief. Unfortunately, that was one of the things I guess I was prepared for. Did a lot of moving around as a kid.
Yes,
it was pretty normal to move around.
Yes.
So you pretty much already have, I guess in that way, you kind of have a pre-defense already set up. Whenever you get into any situation, you have your out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ready. So
you learn to manage it.
Learn to manage, right?
Yes. And that is what I often say is we learn to manage it. We learn to manage our money.
Right.
We learn to manage our time, hopefully.
Right.
We learn to manage other aspects of our life. And so we learn to manage the grief, the emotions.
Wow.
We don't ever get over it. We learn to live with it. We go through it and work through it. And it's really hard work.
Yeah, I was telling my wife a few days ago, some baggage you just can't put down. There are certain baggage in life you're not necessarily going to be just able to get rid of. So sometimes you just got to learn how to adjust the weight. You got to kind of shift it in your life to, this isn't the most important thing. These are more important. These things are more prioritized. But this baggage, yeah, it's still there. It's still a shadow in life, but I just can't put all my focus on that.
It's interesting because our pastor just brought up a really interesting analogy that I feel like goes well with what you just said. So there's a picture of who was the guy that bit the ear?
Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson. Okay, thanks.
That's what you know him for?
Okay. I know, which I shouldn't because he was a great
knockout.
Yes.
It was.
But he had him in the ring and he said, can you imagine going in and fighting him? And he said, we look at Jesus as our coach on the sideline, cheering us, telling us what to do. And he said, in reality, Jesus died so that he could actually replace us in the ring. Mm. And so when you said that, he should be the one carrying that baggage for you. You can't do it. You're right. Yeah. You cannot carry that baggage. You can't even shift it. You have to wave your white flag and you have to say, Jesus, you have to carry it for me. But that is releasing a lot too. Like you are giving up a part of whatever that grief is when you move into and you say, okay, I can't do it. Jesus, you have to handle it.
And may I
Please.
May I tell you about my little piece with that?
I would love it.
Actually, the pain was so intense. And I took it to Jesus and I said, I cannot. But visually, I saw myself with a white linen cloth laid out and depositing all of the grief in the center of the cloth, bringing the edges of the cloth up, tying it into a bundle, walking to the foot of the cross, putting the bundle down at the feet of Jesus, and saying, this is my gift, this is my sacrifice. I cannot, but you can. I ask you one thing, please. Don't waste it.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you, he has not wasted not one, not the tiniest bit. I wouldn't be here with you today.
And that's really hard, and I'm crying. So just, I told you I was going to.
Oh, it was coming. We knew.
I know, but it's really interesting because having that physical, visual, and even whatever is having that in your hand and then saying this is yours now. That's really hard to let go,
Yes.
That's something that you're letting go that is, we're passing tissues now, so okay. But it's hard to let go and a lot of people aren't ready.
Yeah.
It's that process of working through and being able to say I have to let go because it is holding you down and you think letting it go, quote unquote, is saying goodbye, and that means you're going to forget. It means that you're going to, you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
It's a lie. It's not true.
Correct.
But that's what you think about when you're saying oh, Jesus is going to carry that for me, but then I have to release it to him.
I have to be willing to release it. And in that release, there can be an amount of joy. And the joy can be so deep. And very often these parts are things that are difficult for non-believers to understand.
That was the question I was going to bring up.
Because they don't have that relationship.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to have that sense. My daughter Melanie was remarkable in that she could stand in front of large crowds and speak. At 15, she could stand and speak and tell about what was going on in her life, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And one of her quotes in an article that she wrote is, his joy makes me smile.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I said that in our church yesterday. I was like, sometimes hardship falls on us, not because God doesn't love us, but because He wants us to see that He's better. These things happen in our lives. Things are taken out of our lives, so we can know there must be something better than this.
Yes.
And that's true. That is very hard for an unbeliever to understand, because they're like, well, I like this a lot. But they don't know how big God actually is, like how fulfilling He actually is. That did make me bring up a question, though, because when you do counsel people who might not be Christians, just might not even believe there is a God, how do you talk to them? Because I know we have a few that might be listening, and they might want to know how can they cope with their grief, quote unquote, outside of the Christian realm.
Every individual, you accept them where they are. And I like for the other person to teach me about their grief. I don't tell them what to do, what page to turn, where to get on and get off, because they are the teachers. My philosophy is coming alongside. Does that sound a little biblical?
Let me walk with you. Yeah.
That's it. Let me walk with you and you teach me.
Mm.
That's real.
Yeah.
It is.
That's real. We're gonna continue this in just a minute. We're going to break here.
Yeah.
Wow, that was deep.
Yeah,
Feel free to think freely.
You teach me about your grief.
Yeah. This is All My Hope by Crowder featuring Torrin Wells. I messed the man's name up. Torrin Wells.
Torrin Wells. Okay.
Torrin Wells.
Shout out.
That's that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's real. I got some questions about that right there, which I was just talking about. I'll be honest with you.
I got a couple myself. I
You
got
know.
one question.
Right.
So,
Yes, and I would also like to mention that grief affects every part of your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just your emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a whole package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when your neck is hurting or your foot is hurting or your, believe it or not, that can be
Wow.
for sure.
Suppressed. Yes.
Suppressed
Emotions.
grief can cause
Yep.
real health problem. Like it can cause.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, a lot of people deal with anxiety because of suppressed emotions a lot of times.
Uh-uh.
I can understand that because, like,
Alright.
coming this way, because my grandmother lived off Monticello Road. So coming this way, it's like, I really don't want to go this way. This is the only way I can get. Well, it's another way I can get there, but it's the fastest way to get where I need to get to. And it's like I get there, it's like, oh man. And then once I pass the exit, I'm good. So it's like, yeah, I can understand that.
Here we go.
All right, we're back. So I gotta be me. Sorry.
Oh yeah, be
So I have to ask a question. So, all right. So this whole give it to Jesus thing, right? On one end, then other than you say, but if you suppress your grief, it can lead to health issues. So how do you know whether you've released it to Jesus or whether you've just chosen to act like you forgot it?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. And learning to process, I call it a process. And a process is not over in a moment. And there is not a given time frame. And I never tell anyone, oh, next year it'll be like it never happened.
Right.
Oh, not at all. Because grief takes as long as it takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we, again, learn to manage it. But it will affect every single part of your being. Your thoughts, because in the beginning, you're so focused on your loss and on your pain. It's like looking at everything through a zoom lens.
Right.
And everything you see through your pain and through loss. There can be the physical symptoms, the dry mouth, the breathlessness, the pounding in the chest, the hurting that almost feels like a heart attack. It hurts so much. There can be the pain in your gut with the stomach aches and the sleeplessness. And then the emotions, yes, the shock. Initially, we can sometimes be so numb that we don't feel anything. And I almost see that as being wrapped in a cloud, with the cloud being a buffer. And little by little, that's peeled back as we are able to tolerate the pain of the loss, the separation.
Wow.
So are there specific steps then that maybe or questions that you can answer to know whether you have gone through that process and given it to Jesus, and you're in the steps to being whole and dealing with that grief, rather than just managing and how do you know?
Well, sometimes it's if you can reach out to another and you can put yourself aside and put your own experiences aside so that you can help bring another forward, then you have often reached a place that you know yours is still there. I tend to say grief changes size, changes shapes, changes intensity. It's always there. But I can talk about my daughter, and I can talk about experiences without tearing up. But you know what? They're my tears, and it's my love.
Yeah.
And so if the tears do come, that's okay too.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So I have a question as well. It's kind of going off what Dave was saying also, but those that, just run away from it, don't have no want to take this head on. How do you deal with people like that?
You can't deal with people unless they're willing to come to you. And there are people who run from it. And there are people who will just travel and travel and travel and not stay still long enough to face it. And I tend to think about, do you remember the hamster on the little hamster wheel that goes round and round? Yeah, round and round we go. Yes, and that's the way it seems sometimes with some people, and they won't stop long enough. But eventually, it will catch up with them. It will catch up in the physical body. It will catch up in relationships. It will catch up in the emotions. It will eventually catch up.
Do you think that each person really knows deep down when they ask themselves if they are managing or if they're actually healing? Do you think that they know, that they can feel it if they ask themselves? Or do you think that...
Is it fully processed, I guess?
Or can they just keep lying to themselves and saying they're okay? Or can they...
Denial. We live in a world of denial. Yes. And eventually, to be healthy, eventually we'll face it and be willing to say, yes, this needs a little work.
Gotcha.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people do go the denial route, thinking that that is the way that they're going to get healthy. So I was just talking to someone and they were saying that they were dealing with loss and grief, but that they were fine. And I was like, oh, like, what does fine mean? And she said, well, I mean, like, I can go to work and it's not the first thing on my mind. And I think someone just said it too, like, I don't want to see somebody because then I have to talk about it all again. I think Dave said it earlier. And I think it's hard to get people to the point where it's okay to talk about it. And I think that's what you were saying, when they can help someone else through that a loss, that is when they are on the path to being well, in the sense of that loss.
And the go into work, you mentioned work, and that can sometimes be an escape for people, or it also can be a relief for them. It can become a safe place for them. And it's almost like compartmentalizing and putting your grief off to the side and say, okay, I know it's here and I will go back to it, but I must do my job because that's what sustains my family.
Right.
And so if that's the mindset and the mode you're in, and if someone approaches you at work, and it's okay to say, I really appreciate your thoughts, but right now I can't talk about it.
Yeah. I have a neighbor that I talk with all the time, and he's told me about his daughter being killed. She got hit by a car when she was like 27. And then one day we were talking, and I didn't realize, he said, yeah, that happened in 2010. I didn't realize it was like that recent, because he deals with alcohol real heavy. And the only time he really is able to talk about it with me is like when he's really heavy drunk.
Right.
When he's sober, he's quiet and he don't want to talk to nobody.
Right.
When he's drunk, all of a sudden now he's open to talk. And I was like, I didn't know it was that, because I thought the first time he told me, I thought it was like in the 90s, and I'm not gonna tell nobody get past it, but at the same time, it sounded like an excuse he had been using for a long time, but it wasn't. It really wasn't. How do you talk to someone who's the only time they're able to open up is when they are like already at the end of their rope, basically, like that intoxication, or they've done whatever they could to nullify the feeling.
Yes. Well, it's very difficult to carry on meaningful conversation with someone at that time. And what you just described all too often happens because that's an escape. People are trying to escape from the pain. And so they may choose alcohol, they may choose some other substance as a method of escape. But if there is some way, in a moment of clarity, thank you, that's a word I needed, that you can get them to admit or to realize, you really need to deal with this. You need to deal with the emotions. You need to deal with the thoughts, because remember, I said grief affects all parts of us.
Yeah.
That includes behaviors. Yes.
And coming, as you talk about it, Jay, that's kind of what I went through a few years ago when my dad passed. That was my outlet. Drinking was my outlet. So it was like, being drunk or just being out of it, at first it was like, okay, I just needed just to get through the day. And I was in high school, so just needed to just get through the day. I would have a Pepsi bottle with whatever would be in it throughout my day of school just to manage. And then by the weekend, it's whatever. But then you think about it, every time when I was in that place, I thought about it more. And then I really didn't have any, or I felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to. I could have went to my mom, could have went to my sisters or whatnot. But I felt like I didn't have anybody that would understand, because I'm the one that's supposed to handle this. So I think that could be something that he's dealing with. He feel like he's the one that has to handle it, and he doesn't. Nobody else can.
Yeah. I've when the conversations I've had with him, of course, when he's in his intoxicated state, that's when he's the most honest with me. It's usually stuff like he's angry with God. My daughter loved God, but obviously he let this happen to her. And and he's even opened up to the point where it's like, I'm just doing this because I don't want to be here no more. Really, like literally, I'm drinking myself to possibly one day this takes me out, so I ain't got to feel this pain at all. And I'm like, you still have a child here though. Even though your daughter's gone, you still have children here, but he doesn't even see that right now.
Yeah, but you gotta get past that kind of logic, though.
Yes, and it's a choice.
Yeah.
Yes, and my philosophy is make intentional decisions and make an intentional choice with the realization. And I too had another child and had to make the choice. Am I going to live my life with a total and complete focus on the one who's no longer here, or who's no longer physically here?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Or am I going to be a part of my son's life and cheer him on and be a part of his future? Oh, indeed, there are a lot of choices, and they can be very hard choices in very challenging times.
Right. And I think we got to make sure that we don't overjudge people's coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Because, for some people it was alcohol, for other people it was church.
Yeah.
So we don't
This is
need
true.
to do that.
Yes. And do I remember a scripture verse somewhere about judge not, lest you
Right.
be
You
judged?
be judged.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you judge someone else's coping mechanisms, you may find out that your coping mechanism isn't as sweet as you think.
That's right.
Yeah.
Feel free to think freely.
All right. So the feature song of the night is by Lathan Warlick, and it's called "Need a Blessing."
This right here was busting on that Urban City mixtape. By the way, if you haven't heard the Urban City Radio mixtape, it is free and it is on iTunes Podcast and iHeartRadio,
and also on Google Play. I listened to it like 3 times.
Yeah, on Google Play Podcast. That's right.
I know. When we come back, we're gonna talk about your book. But
we got another segment. Then
okay. Because I was gonna tell you it's a question on Facebook.
That's the question I wanted to ask tonight.
We're gonna open. I think we should open up with that question. By Monica.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the question that me and Dave have for like the past couple weeks.
And I think dealing with a lot of people ask why, like, why did this happen? Why did I mean, I definitely asked that when my dad died. Like, he was, in great shape. He literally just fell over and died while he was out jogging. So like he did all the right things. And I have come to the realization after losing our friend last year that we live in a broken world. God doesn't say, "Oh, you're gonna die tomorrow. Guess what? I want you to." Like, that's not what he's saying. We live in a broken world, and it happens because we live in a world of sin. And so it's not God saying, "I want." Anyway, getting ready to go in, but.
And we're back, Freethinkers Radio. So we did have a question on Facebook, and it's a question that I actually was going to ask as well. The question is, how do you help a child or teenager grieve without making them feel pressured to release?
Children and teens do things in their own timetable, in their own way. And children and teens tend to know about grief, respond to grief in their developmental stage. So it's important to know where a child is developmentally and to give them opportunities, and to understand also children can't grieve 24/7 like adults do.
Right.
Yes. A child may go play and come back an hour later with a question. But very often their grief is acted out or comes out in their play. So we need to pay attention and talk to them in simple, clear language that they can understand and that is on their level.
Right.
And give them a lot of comfort. A child very often has can sometimes have a guilt feeling and feel like they caused it. And so that's one of the things adults need to be cautious of, helping the child understand that they were not the cause of it. And a question that often comes up from a child is, well, who's going to take care of me if something happens to you?
Yes.
So being very reassuring and providing information for the child, and also keeping their schedule and routine as even as is possible. That's very important. With adolescents, they often tend to prefer their own friends to others. So give them a little bit of space and a little bit of time with their friends. And they will sometimes talk more with their friends than they will with the adults.
Do you mind, Dave, me asking how your kids, how you handled that with your kids? How did they deal with it?
With them, well, actually, the first explanation that was given to them was the fact that their little brother was an angel, and they got so enthusiastic with that. They were pretty much done. They were good. That was their whole thing. It was, you know what I'm saying. Now seeing their mama cry, that used to bother them a lot. But if she wasn't crying, they're like, "Hey, Jacob's an angel," and that's all they would talk about. But every time they said it, she would cry. Wow. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like the kids are all celebrating the fact that their little brother's an angel. But every time that name gets brought up or you bring that situation up, you know what I'm saying, it interrupts my wife's, regular scheduled programming fully. So, at some point, I just like, look, y'all need to stop talking about it. You just stop, just cut it out, but they weren't the ones having the grief issues, because I think they were so young, you know what I mean? They really didn't understand what exactly had happened. And then their little brother, they had only known their little brother about 6 months.
Right.
He was 6 months old. So it wasn't like he wasn't, if he was 2, I could have seen things being a little different, but they were still carrying him, holding him and stuff. So,
Well, very often people who lose a child are hungry to hear that child's name and are hungry to hear a conversation about that child.
Interesting.
Because hearing conversation about the child or stories about the child validates the life that was lived.
Right.
But if a mom or a dad has a difficult time with that and hearing the child's name, then that should be respected as well. When I am with another person who's lost a loved one, I always ask permission if I can use their loved one's name. First, I ask the name and then give them an opportunity to tell me a little bit about them. And then, as I said, I ask permission to use their name.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I know. My wife lost her mother when she was 7 years old. So it's like, so it's actually kind of been interesting watching my wife, because my wife is now starting to deal with the grief process. From 7 to 15, she doesn't even really remember most of her childhood. It's like she has snapped out certain things and blacked out certain things of her childhood, and it's either been just about, I remember things about my dad, I remember things about my sisters and my brother, but like intimate things with her mother, it's like I don't either. She does, for some of her, sometimes she don't want to remember it, or sometimes it's like, where did that go? And it's been interesting because I've actually been sitting around my wife sometimes, and she'll hear a song on the radio, and all of a sudden it's like she remembers 4 years old. That was my mother's favorite song, but she hadn't heard that song since she was 4 or 5 years old, and now she's 27.
Your subconscious is a very interesting thing. I don't know if I'm assuming that you probably deal with this, but we think that we don't remember, so it's not there. But our subconscious is actually through 6 years old, I think, is when it's developed. And so a lot of things that we don't remember actually affect the way that we respond to people, to situations, maybe our personality. So a lot of people that are traumatized when they're a small child or they have a traumatic experience, the way that they are as an adult is actually built upon what happened when they don't even remember it.
Yeah.
And yes, indeed. And in my own case, my granddaddy died when I was 8 years old. And who knows what to do with an 8-year-old?
Yeah.
I live in rural South Carolina, and it's just another child. And that was in the days of the person being laid out in the living room and people sitting up all night with the individual, and this was my granddaddy.
Wow.
He was important in my life. Yes, indeed. And so when I was dealing with the death of my daughter, I too actually had to go all the way back to being an 8-year-old and start at the beginning.
Wow.
So how do you explain to a child about death, or when someone dies? How do you explain that?
Well, it can be, a lot of it sometimes depends on what the child's background is and their culture and what they have been accustomed to. It sometimes can get them to think about a toy that is broken. It could be a toy that they love a lot and that's broken and that it can't be fixed. And the body at a point when there's no more breath and there's no life, and sometimes the body can't be put back together for that person. And so we don't forget about that person because they have a special place in our heart.
Right.
And so the relationship can still be, but it's just different.
Yeah, that's good.
Does that help?
That helps.
It does.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
This was great.
Well,
This was,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Dr. D, if you can explain to everyone how they can get in contact with you, about your book, also about your counsel group.
Yes, actually, my practice is called Arts as Medicine, and that's arts with an S on it, and that's using creative outlets for expression. And I have a Facebook page that is Arts as Medicine, and a website as well. And you can reach me on the Facebook page, or you can reach me through the website, or it's really easy. It's Dr. D, D-R-D-E-E, at artsasmedicine.com. That's the email and a good way to reach me. I have a grief support group also that actually is meeting tomorrow night. It meets once a month.
Okay.
And it's the 4th Tuesday of the month. This group actually is sponsored by Dunbar Northeast Funeral Homes, but it's open to anyone.
And where do you meet?
We meet at Vive Church. That's V-I-V-E, and it's 2630 Clemson Road.
Okay, so tomorrow
6:30 until 8.
6:30 until 8 tomorrow at 5.
Tomorrow at 5. And I would be real interested in having a grief support group in the Irmo Chapin area, if we find a sponsor for it, and a meeting place for it. And one other thing to mention is my book. It is called A Morning Miracle, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. and it is about our story after our daughter's death and putting life back together, picking up the pieces. And actually, it sets forth a framework for picking up the pieces and putting life back together.
Where do you get that book?
The book is available from me. It's also available on Amazon and can be ordered through Amazon.com.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. And
The name of the book is again, one more time?
the book is A Morning Miracle, and there's a dancer on the front of it that looks like she's walking away from you.
Order straight snakes.
Yes.
There we go.
And butterflies on it.
Oop. Bring it on this side and
On this side.
There we go. All right. Hey, Dr.
All right. I'm learning about this.
I
This has
love
been
it.
a real learning experience for me.
All of us. All of us.
Yes. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you and doing workshops and seminars. Those are my favorite things to do that groups of people can be involved in.
Absolutely. We definitely thank you. This has been a learning experience for everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, if you were already out here checking us out.
Yep.
If you were already out here checking us out, make sure that you what just happened? Okay. Yeah, if you are already out here checking us out, make sure that you share this with your share this with people who need it. This was some great information today.
Yep.
Oh,
Absolutely.
And
also,
I forgot to tell you
Okay.
that I also am affiliated and work with Richland County
corner.
Coroner's Office, yes. And we have a volunteer team called the CARE Team. And if you're interested in volunteering, the team members outreach to people in the community who have received a death notification.
Wow.
In South Carolina, it is the coroner's office that delivers death notifications.
Okay.
Yes, and so these volunteers will make a phone call or make a contact with families who have had a death in the family.
Gotcha.
Yes, thank you
Great.
for letting me mention that.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
And until next week,
Right.
next week we won't be talking about death.
We know.
My goodness. But I
Couple
think we
weeks
have
there.
definitely covered it.
This was
Yes.
And
It was
and we needed
great.
that.
yeah.
Yes.
We needed that. Make sure that, like I said, anyone you know who needs this, make sure that they get this. Till then, feel free to think freely. Thank you again, Doc.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think we're off.
Is that good?
We good? Good. Yeah. Okay.
Hold on.
Ooh.
Don't move.